Well, hello people of Playground. Today we're going to talk about getting that photorealistic look featuring two new SDXL filters that were just released, RealVis XL V2 and Real Stock Photo. Now before we start, I want to kind of talk to you about how you can get more of a photorealistic look with just using SDXL. This is going to help you get more out of the filters once we get to that point. To start off, we're going to use a very simple prompt that I'm going to flash on the screen. And if you look at the overall image, it's really not a bad photo. In terms of the composition, the details, for a base model, it looks pretty decent. Although the tendency for SDXL is to have sort of this plastic, over-processed look. You could almost say it looks hyper-realistic. Now, if we zoom into the details, and you know me, it's always about the small details. If we look at the eyes closely, it probably could use more definition. There is a little bit of skin texture showing. You could kind of see it on the cheeks here, just a tad on the forehead. It's there, but it's not pronounced. Generally speaking, for a prompt like this, these are the kind of results you're going to get. Now, as we look at this side by side, the image on the right, I simply added raw photo. And at first glance, you may not really see a big difference, but if you zoom in closer, you will see those differences. One of the obvious things for me anyway is the highlights on the forehead and on the cheek here. It's just a bit more distinct, while here it's a bit more softer. If we look at the eyes and the skin texture of the original image, look at the eyes and the skin texture. By adding raw photo, the definition of the eyes is just a tad better. That skin texture on the cheek starts to come out a little bit more. Very slight difference, but it will make a bigger difference in the overall picture, as you'll see in a few minutes. In this side-by-side, I've used analog, and one of the things that you'll notice right away is that it tends to have sort of a greenish bluish hue to it, mimicking analog film. Whereas the image on the left is a lot warmer, it's got more orangey and reddish tones. This one is a personal favorite of mine, and that's using the word Polaroid. As you can see, it's got sort of that matted, faded look to mimic analog film as well. It's very obvious in terms of the color and hue that they're very, very different. So what's the point of all this? Well, if you take these keywords like analog, Polaroid, raw photo, whatever the case may be, if you put them together, they will give you some specific looks. For example, I have analog film and Polaroid together, and I also threw in film grain. Film grain on its own probably wouldn't do much, but when you combine it with Polaroid and analog, it'll give you some interesting results. If we zoom in here, we do see a bit of that skin texture, but even more, you see kind of like some speckles and scratches here. You see that the corner is faded, especially up here. It's these little details that make the difference. And as I mentioned before, it's got this nice matted analog look. Now, staying with analog film and Polaroid, adding things like skin texture or skin details, and I even threw in cinematic, gets you even more details in this image. It has more of a matte look, but if you zoom in here, you also see that the skin texture now is starting to come out even more so. Here's another variation by using raw photo and analog combined, along with the skin texture and film grain. Yes, the face is changing slightly, and that's going to happen when you introduce new words to the prompt. It's going to shape it a little bit differently, even though you're using the same seed. But this version isn't as faded. It doesn't have that matte look as much as the other one, but we do see the skin texture a little bit more. The eyes look nicer. It looks just more believable. So generally speaking, just with SDXL, you can get a pretty believable photorealistic image with the right words. Where these filters play a role is that you can prompt really simply and get the same results without having to put in raw photo, film grain, all that stuff. Although they do help shape your image, it just gives you a quicker base to start with, and it will give you a particular look. If we look at these three images, this is again a very simple prompt. Close-up portrait of a beautiful woman. This is base SDXL with the same seed. I used realistic stock photo. And this one is RealVis XL. If we do a side-by-side comparison, there's an obvious style difference between the two, from base model to real stock photo. The contrast in color and the definition is way nicer, even though it's a really simple prompt. And if we look at the skin details here, they're not as pronounced, but we do see a slight wrinkle here, a bit of texture on the cheeks and the forehead. I'd say pretty believable. Where we look at the base model and it's like really smooth, almost plastic looking. But if we look at real stock photo versus RealVis XL, we can already see the little details in the skin, the wrinkles by the mouth, under the eyes, on the forehead. And this is going to be a running theme, that the skin texture on RealVis XL is just on another level, and sometimes a little too much, and you may have to dial it down. In these next set of images, I've used the same prompt, same seed, settings, and samplers so that you could see the differences. One of the biggest differences you're going to find between real stock photo, which is always going to be on the left, and RealVis XL. Real stock photo tends to have a naturally warm, bright tone to the image, whereas RealVis has more of a cinematic, bluish, orange and teal type of vibe to it. Of course, it depends on how you prompt, but generally speaking, it tends to have deeper blacks and shadows compared to real stock photo. If we look at the hands in both of them, they're passable. I mean, you know how it looks when you're trying to hold a phone and take a selfie. You develop these claw-like hands, right? But I would say it's a workable and passable. You could do some post-production on those. But these hands here look pretty decent. As we look at the next set of images here, we see the fingers look pretty believable, I would say. But in the RealVis photo, there's no hand showing, even though it's the same seed. But very lifelike images and believable, I would say. And another set of 4 images for more comparisons for you to see visually. Now, comparing some portrait type shots, we see real stock photo here on the left, RealVis on the right. Once again, you can see the skin texture here. It's a little heavy, to be honest. And real stock photo here having some moles on the face, where actually in this case the skin texture is very believable. Few moles here, and I did prompt for that actually, but you could clearly see the orangey hue versus the bluish tone here. As we look at these two examples, more waist up shots to compare, but they both have that nice analog feel. In this case, with Henry Cavill as Superman, I personally like the cinematic look versus real stock photos tone. And in this case, both of the details look great, especially the little beard fuzz. Even the texture of the suit. Now, this one has more of a gold, like how the logo's supposed to be, where this one it missed for some reason. The ever so popular steampunk prompt. And as I said before, you'll notice as well with RealVis XL, it tends to have deeper blacks and contrasts, which I find very pleasing. Most of all, the little details on the hat here, on the outfit, on the body, so much more detailed than real stock photo. And not to say this doesn't look good, I mean, looks great. This one has more of a dramatic flair to it, but I think it's very clear that both filters have their strengths and weaknesses. It really comes down to personal preference. Even though these filters are geared towards portraiture in people, it can do other things like animals, for example. We see some cute tiger cubs here. One thing I found really interesting though is that RealVis XL picked up on the tiger cubs' bluish gray eyes, and white tigers are known to have bluish gray eyes, whereas a real stock photo, it was more of a gray. It can also do cars pretty well. One of the things that really stood out with RealVis is the motion blur. I do have it in the prompt, and you could kind of see it in real stock photo, but it's just more evident in these images for RealVis. And they do pretty decent landscape images as well. Now, it's not as good as some of the other filters, but generally speaking, this filter can be quite versatile, but its strengths are with people and portraiture. Now stay tuned for the next video where we're going to take a look at Starlight Animated and Xavi Chroma XL. And by the way, if you want to know all the recommended settings of all the filters on Playground, I'll leave a link in the description below. And if you happen to be new to Playground and you haven't used our canvas yet, make sure to check out these videos here. Until the next video, my friends, this is Playground.